The town of Willowmere sat quietly between rolling hills and winding rivers, a place where time seemed to move a little slower and faces were familiar. Among the people who lived there was a woman named Clara Evans, a nurse in her mid-40s whose presence in the community was as constant as the church bells that chimed every Sunday morning. Clara was not someone who drew attention. She spoke softly, dressed plainly, and never sought the spotlight. Yet, in ways unseen, she carried within her a power that changed lives, the quiet power of caring. Clara lived alone in a small house at the edge of town. Her husband had passed away years ago, and though she had no children, she filled her days caring for others. Every morning before dawn, she would brew a pot of coffee, slip on her light blue cardigan, and head to the local clinic, where she worked the early shift. The clinic was always short-staffed, and Clara often picked up extra hours without complaint. Her patients loved her. Not because she had a particularly remarkable medical technique, but because she listened, really listened. When old Mr. Keaton came in with his endless stories about his army days, Clara listened with genuine interest. When young mothers brought their sick children in, nervous and sleep-deprived, Clara had a way of soothing both mother and child with her calm tone and gentle hands. But perhaps her greatest act of caring began one winter morning when the first snowflakes of the season were falling. It was a Monday, and the clinic was unusually quiet. Clara was restocking bandages when she noticed a boy sitting alone in the waiting area. He couldn't have been more than 12, wearing a coat far too thin for the cold, his hands red and chapped. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Clara walked over slowly. "Hi there," she said softly, crouching so her eyes met his. "Are you waiting for someone?" The boy shook his head. I just needed a place to sit for a while," he murmured. Clara nodded. "You're welcome to stay. But it's freezing out there. When's the last time you had something warm to eat?" He hesitated. "Yesterday, I think." Without another word, Clara guided him to the small kitchenette behind the reception desk. She poured him some soup left over from lunch and handed him a piece of bread. He ate quietly, glancing up every now and then to make sure she wasn't going to send him away. When he finished, Clara asked gently, "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Eli," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And where are your parents, Eli?" His eyes lowered to the floor. "Mom's not around. Dad's trying to find work out of town. I was staying with my aunt, but she said she can't anymore." Clara felt a tightening in her chest. The boy's clothes were thin, his shoes worn, and there was a sadness in his eyes that no child should ever carry. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" she asked. He shook his head again. That night, after her shift ended, Clara didn't hesitate. She called the local social services office, but no one picked up. It was already late. She looked at Eli, sitting on the clinic bench with his small backpack and a look of quiet resignation. And so, she made a decision. "Come on," she said, holding out her hand. "You'll stay with me tonight. We'll figure things out tomorrow." Eli's eyes widened. "Really? Really," she said with a small smile. "Let's get you out of this cold." That evening, Clara made him a proper meal, pasta and warm bread, and found some old pajamas that had belonged to her late nephew. She set up the guest room with fresh sheets and tucked him in as though he were her own. In the days that followed, Clara worked tirelessly to help Eli. She called social workers, schools, and even reached out to local shelters. But none had space or could take him immediately. The system, overburdened and slow, offered little hope. So Clara did what she always did, she cared, quietly and persistently. She enrolled him in the local school, explaining his situation to the principal. She made him lunches, checked his homework, and listened when he talked about how he missed his father. Slowly, Eli began to change. The shy, withdrawn boy started to smile more. He helped Clara around the house, feeding her old cat, Mabel, and shoveling snow from the walkway. The townspeople began to notice too. At first, there were whispers, people curious about the nurse who had taken in a strange boy. But as the weeks turned into months, even the skeptics couldn't deny the change in both of them. Clara seemed lighter, as though caring for Eli had awakened something long asleep in her heart. One afternoon, when the snow was beginning to melt and the first signs of spring were peeking through, Eli came home from school carrying a crumpled piece of paper. He placed it on the table shyly. "It's for you," he said. Clara unfolded it. It was a drawing, a simple sketch of her and Eli sitting at the kitchen table, smiling. At the top, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "My family." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Eli," she whispered. "That means more than you know." But life, as it often does, shifted unexpectedly. A few weeks later, Clara received a call. It was Eli's father. He had finally found steady work and was coming back to Willowmere to take his son. The news was bittersweet. Clara was glad Eli would be reunited with his family, but the thought of the house growing quiet again left her heart heavy. When the day came, Eli packed his small bag. He hugged Clara tightly before he left, his face buried in her cardigan. "I don't want to go," he said softly. You're like my mom." Clara fought back the tears and smiled. "You have to be with your dad now. He needs you. But listen to me, Eli, you can come visit anytime, okay?" He nodded, wiping his eyes. "Promise." "Promise." As the car drove away, Clara stood on the porch, waving until it disappeared down the road. The house felt unbearably quiet that evening. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the drawing still pinned to the fridge. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to cry, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Because even though Eli was gone, his presence had reminded her that caring for others wasn't just her duty, it was her gift. Months passed, and the seasons turned again. Clara returned fully to her work at the clinic, her days filled with the steady rhythm of tending to patients. Yet, something had changed in her, and in the town too. People who had once kept to themselves began reaching out more. Neighbors checked on the elderly. Teenagers volunteered at the shelter. And somehow, the small acts of care seemed to ripple outward, quietly shaping the town in unseen ways. One rainy afternoon, as Clara was closing the clinic, the door creaked open. She looked up, and froze. Eli stood there, taller now, his once thin frame filled out, his hair longer, his eyes bright. Beside him stood a man with tired but kind eyes, his father. "Eli." Clara breathed. "Hi, Miss Clara," he said with a grin. "I told you I'd come back." Clara's heart swelled. She hurried over and hugged him tightly. "Look at you. You've grown so much." Eli's father stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I wanted to thank you for taking care of my boy when I couldn't. I'll never forget it." Clara shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would have." But Eli's father smiled sadly. "No, ma'am. Not everyone would have. Not everyone cares like you do." That evening, they stayed for dinner. Laughter filled the small house once more, and for the first time in years, Clara felt the warmth of true family around her table. As the night drew on and they said their goodbyes, Eli handed her a small box. "I made this in school," he said, blushing. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." Inside was a simple wooden heart, carved with shaky hands. Etched into the surface were 3 small words, "You saved me." Tears welled in Clara's eyes again, but this time she didn't hide them. She hugged him one last time and whispered, "You saved me too, Eli." Years later, when Clara had grown older and retired from the clinic, people in Willowmere still spoke of her. They remembered her gentle ways, her endless patience, and the boy she had once taken in during a cold winter. Her legacy wasn't written in awards or recognition, it was etched in the lives she had quietly touched. Eli grew up to become a nurse himself, inspired by the woman who had shown him what true compassion meant. On his desk, he kept a framed photo of the two of them, and that little wooden heart. Whenever someone asked him why he chose his profession, he would smile and say, "Because once, someone cared enough to believe I was worth saving." And so, the quiet power of caring continued, passed from one heart to another, invisible, perhaps, but stronger than anything that could ever be seen. It moved through Willowmere like the wind through the trees, gentle, constant, and full of grace, reminding everyone that sometimes, the smallest acts of love can leave the deepest marks on the world.